Part 1. The Debt That Bound Me. I didn't choose to join the Squid Games. It wasn't some desperate gamble to chase riches. It was survival, pure and simple. My name is Ethan, and I found myself trapped in the games because of a secret that had slowly poisoned my life. It started 2 years ago when my family's world came crashing down. My father's small construction business was sabotaged by a rival company. They undercut him on every contract and spread rumors that our projects were unsafe. In the end, my father was forced to take out loans from dangerous people to keep us afloat. When his health declined under the stress, the debt became mine to bear. But the truth was darker. My younger brother, Danny, had fallen in with a gang. He thought he was helping by getting quick cash, robbing delivery trucks, running small-time jobs. Then one night, he botched a job and lost the gang's money. They came for him, and when they did, they found me. To save Danny, I promised to pay them back. The sum was staggering. The interest kept climbing, and no matter how much I earned, I could never make a dent. Threats turned to violence. One night, a letter arrived. Pay up, or your family dies. The card arrived 2 days later. A black card with a single phone number. I hesitated for hours staring at it. When I finally called, the voice on the other end was calm, almost soothing. Do you wish to participate? In what? I asked. An opportunity to erase all your debts, completely. That was all they told me. I didn't have a choice. The van picked me up in the dead of night. The windows were blacked out, and the silence inside was suffocating. There were others, but no one spoke. I couldn't see their faces in the dim light, only the occasional glint of their fearful eyes. After what felt like hours, we arrived at a sprawling compound. The towering gate loomed before us, opening with a mechanical groan. Beyond it lay a labyrinthine facility, every corridor sterile and cold. We were stripped of our belongings and given identical green jumpsuits. Each one bore a number. I was 119. They herded us into a massive dormitory. Rows of bunk beds stretched endlessly, crammed with people of all ages and backgrounds. Some looked defiant, others terrified. A man in his 60s sat trembling on a lower bunk. Beside him, a woman barely out of her teens stared blankly at the floor. This is insane, someone muttered. Where are we? The guards didn't answer. Their faces were hidden behind black masks, their movements robotic. Cameras watched us from every corner. The air was heavy with despair and paranoia. The next morning, the first game was announced. We were led into an arena, its walls painted with garish, childlike murals that clashed horribly with the deadly tension in the air. The game was called Thread of Fate. In the center of the arena stood a towering contraption resembling a giant loom. Strands of colored thread hung from it, each tied to a spool on the ground. The rules were simple. We were to choose a thread and follow it to the end. Some threads led to safety. Others led to traps. If your thread broke or you strayed from it, you were eliminated. We drew lots to determine the order. I was near the middle. The first contestant, a burly man in his 30s, picked a red thread. He began weaving his way through the maze of strings, his movements careful but swift. Suddenly, his thread snapped. A trapdoor opened beneath him, and he vanished with a scream. The sound of his fall echoed in the deathly silence that followed. One by one, people stepped forward. Their fates decided by luck and instinct. Some threads led to crushing walls, others to blades that swung from the ceiling. When my turn came, my hands trembled as I picked a blue thread. Every step felt like a lifetime. The thread led me through narrow passages and over precarious platforms. Once, it snagged on a protruding nail, and my heart nearly stopped. I freed it carefully and moved on. The air grew colder as I neared the end. The final stretch was a rickety bridge suspended over darkness.
Another contestant, a woman named Kara, had chosen the same path. We reached the bridge together, our threads intertwining. "Only one of us can cross at a time," she said, her voice shaking.
"We can figure this out," I replied, though I wasn't sure I believed it. The bridge groaned under our combined weight. Below us, I could hear something moving, a grinding, mechanical noise. Kara's eyes met mine, filled with desperation. "Please," she whispered. "I have a son."
"My family will die if I don't win this," I said. We stood there, caught between survival and humanity. The clock was ticking, and the bridge wouldn't hold for long.
"Go," I said finally. "I'll figure something out." She hesitated, then nodded and stepped forward. As she reached the other side, the bridge began to collapse. I lunged for the edge, gripping the splintered wood with all my strength. Kara turned, her face pale as she watched me struggle. But before she could act, the floor beneath me gave way. The world went black. Part 2. The Secrets Beneath.
When I woke, I was back in the dormitory. My body ached, and my hands were blistered from gripping the bridge. It was a miracle I survived the fall. But that miracle came with a price. I could feel the eyes of the other contestants on me as I stumbled to my bunk. Some were filled with relief that they weren't the ones who had to face death. Others looked resentful, perhaps angry that I had managed to scrape by while others hadn't. Kara was gone. I didn't know what had happened to her after the bridge collapsed, but she hadn't returned to the dorms. For all I knew, she had been eliminated, in every sense of the word. The dormitory was worse than any prison. We were crammed into a massive room with rows of metal bunks, each one as unforgiving as the concrete floor beneath it. The fluorescent lights buzzed incessantly, never turning off. Cameras loomed in every corner, their lenses always tracking us. Privacy didn't exist here. Even our most vulnerable moments were under surveillance.
In the beginning, we tried to hold on to some semblance of humanity. People shared their stories, whispered reassurances, and even exchanged nervous laughs. But as the days passed and the games grew deadlier, the mood shifted. Whispers turned into accusations, and the already fragile alliances began to crumble. The first murder happened on the third night, and it started with a missing ration. Food was already scarce, each contestant receiving a single meal packet, barely enough to sustain us. When someone's packet went missing, it set off a chain reaction. Accusations flew and tempers flared. By the time the lights dimmed, the tension in the air was so thick you could choke on it. I remember lying in my bunk, staring at the ceiling when I heard a muffled cry. It was faint, barely audible over the hum of the lights. Then came a wet, gurgling sound, followed by silence. I sat up, my heart pounding. Across the room, I saw a figure retreating into the shadows, something glinting in their hand. I wanted to call out, to raise the alarm, but fear paralyzed me. If I spoke, I might be next. In the morning, one of the lower bunks was empty. The mattress had been stripped and the blanket was gone. No one dared to ask what had happened, but we all knew. The guard said nothing. They simply removed the empty bunk, as if the person had never existed. After that, the dormitory became a battlefield. People formed alliances, not out of friendship, but survival. Groups hoarded food, guarded their bunks in shifts, and kept weapons hidden beneath their pillows. I tried to keep to myself, but isolation was dangerous. Malik, a wiry man with a permanent smirk, approached me one night.
"You're quiet," he said, sitting on the edge of my bunk. "That's good. Quiet people survive."
I didn't respond. Something about him put me on edge, like he was sizing me up for something. "Listen," he continued, lowering his voice. "If you're smart, you'll stick with me. I got a good group. We watch each other's backs."
I nodded, Not because I trusted him, but because I didn't want to make an enemy. He patted my shoulder and left, his smirk lingering in the dim light. That night, I slept with one eye open.
The next game was announced 2 days later. We were herded into an arena that looked like a twisted version of a playground. Giant slides, monkey bars, and spinning wheels filled the space. But everything was coated in a sickly green paint that made it look diseased. The game was called The Balance of Power. We were divided into teams and tasked with pulling a massive rope across a chasm. The catch? The chasm was real, and if your team lost, you'd be dragged into the void.
I was placed with Malik and a few others. He took charge immediately, barking orders and assigning positions. As the game began, the rope burned against my palms, the weight of it threatening to pull us all down. Across the chasm, the opposing team struggled just as hard. I recognized one of them. A young woman who had shared her water with me on the first day. Her face was twisted in determination, but there was fear in her eyes. "Pull!" Malik shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't let up!" The other team faltered, their grip slipping. I saw the young woman lose her footing, her scream swallowed by the void as her team was dragged over the edge. The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at my hands, raw and bleeding, and wondered if surviving was worth the price. The nights grew colder after that. The guards turned down the heat, perhaps as a cruel experiment to see how far they could push us. People huddled together for warmth, but trust was a luxury few could afford. One night, I woke to find Malik standing over someone's bunk. In the dim light, I saw him slip something beneath the mattress. The next morning, the owner of the bunk was gone. When I confronted Malik, he just shrugged. "They were weak," he said. "This place weeds out the weak." I wanted to hit him, to scream at him, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. The games weren't just about physical survival. They were eroding our humanity, piece by piece. The final straw came when someone set fire to the dormitory. It happened during the brief hour when the lights were dimmed. Someone, desperate, angry, or simply broken, had smuggled in a piece of cloth soaked in oil. They lit it and threw it onto one of the bunks. The flames spread quickly, the smoke filling the room and choking us. The guards didn't intervene until half the room was engulfed. When they finally extinguished the fire, 3 people were dead and the rest of us were left coughing and covered in ash. "This is madness," I muttered, leaning against my bunk. My hands were trembling and my throat burned from the smoke. Malik appeared beside me, his smirk gone. "Madness is all we've got left," he said quietly. For once, he sounded almost human. That night, I dreamed of home. My brother's laugh, my mother's cooking, my father's rough hands as he patted my shoulder. I woke with tears streaming down my face, but I quickly wiped them away. In this place, weakness was a death sentence. The games weren't over. More horrors awaited us. But as I lay in the dark, surrounded by the sounds of restless breathing and muffled sobs, I made a promise to myself. I would survive. No matter what it took, I would make it out of this nightmare. And if I did, I would make sure the world knew what had happened here. Part 3. The Final Game. The final game was announced with cruel simplicity. 5 of us remained, each battered and desperate. Malik, ever the schemer. Lena, sharp and quiet. Tomas, a burly man with a limp. Aaron, a terrified teenager, and me, clinging to the remnants of my resolve. We were led into the final arena, a circular platform suspended over a void. At its center stood a pedestal holding 5 glowing orbs, with slots arranged around the edges. The rules flashed on a screen. Trust or betrayal. The goal was to place an orb into one of the 5 slots. One slot would activate the win, the others would trigger a fall into the abyss. The twist? We had to agree on the turn order within 15 minutes or it would be randomized. Refusing to play meant immediate elimination. The timer began counting down. Malik tried to negotiate, offering false promises. Lena suggested going in reverse order of performance in the last game. After tense arguments, we reluctantly agreed. Aaron, Tomas, Lena, Malik, and then me. Aaron's hands trembled as he placed the first orb. The platform beneath him dropped instantly. His scream echoed as he vanished into the void. Tomas limped forward, muttering a prayer as he chose an orb. The result was the same. His platform gave way, leaving us shaken.
Lena stepped up, her face pale but determined. She placed her orb and the screen flashed green. Her platform held. Malik, visibly rattled, followed. Another green flash. The platform held. Then it was my turn.
I approached the pedestal, my heart pounding. Malik called out, offering a deal. If I let him go again, he'd share the prize. I refused, knowing his words were empty. Picking up the last orb, I walked to the final slot. My hands shook as I placed it. For a moment, time seemed to freeze.
The screen flashed green. I had won. Malik's screams filled the air as the guards dragged him away, his fury and desperation spilling out in curses. I stood there, numb as the reality sank in. The prize money, $250,000, was mine. Enough to pay off my family's debts, enough to save them. But as I left the arena, I knew I'd never truly escape. The faces of the dead haunted me, and whispers of my survival spread like wildfire. Now, I'm in hiding, constantly looking over my shoulder. The money that saved my family has made me a target. Every shadow feels like a threat. Every noise a reminder that the games are never truly over.